Hello, and welcome to Doctor Who 50 Years Ago, the show that looks back to the episode that aired in 1967 and looks at the differences between then and now. This week, the final episode of the Moonbase, episode 4, which isn't a song and dance like Trevor Baker's all-weather show, although we wish it was. Look it up. I am Ben.
I'm Luke.
And I'm Nick.
And here we are, and here we go into the news from 1967. There's not much. On Monday, the 27th of February, the West Indies Act gave British Associated States status to the Crown Colony of St. Christopher, Nevis, Anguilla, consisting of 3 British-administered Caribbean islands. The citizens of Anguilla, I hope it's pronounced correctly, unhappy being governed by 2 more populated islands, will vote in 5 months' time to secede. Hello, decolonisation. It's been a while, buddy.
What's the modern day attitude towards Britain in the Caribbean islands?
Probably of all the areas in the world we colonised, other than, let's say, like the settler colonies like Canada, Australia, it's probably where we're most positively viewed in the former empire.
We came out of it the least worst, yes.
Yeah, I suppose, because, I mean, we ended the slave trade earlier than pretty much everyone else, and we were one of the earlier empires to abolish slavery, so yeah.
On Thursday, the 2nd of March, Lyndon Johnson announced that the Soviet Union Prime Minister Alexei Kosygin had agreed to discussions between the two nations to limit the number of offensive and defensive nuclear missiles, which is a misnomer, in case you're wondering, that each side would possess. This is the beginning of negotiations towards the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and the Strategic Arms Limitations talks, both of which dominate the 1970s and the beginning of détente. I didn't realise Lyndon Johnson started it, though.
No, it's very much something I associate with Nixon, but I suppose what this goes to show is that in America, both the Democrats and the Republicans at this time both follow the same foreign policy. So there's a lot of unity in American politics about, at least in the foreign sphere.
And consensus, yeah.
Yes, there is more consensus in politics, or at least amongst politicians, than there is now, let's say, in America.
Yes.
You know, now we've reached complete, bipolar sort of situation where neither side can agree, but back in the 60s, they could agree about many things, or at least could compromise.
On the same day, 2 USAF Air Force planes mistakenly bombed the South Vietnamese village of Lang Vey in the Quang Tri province with napalm, killing 135 and making 213 civilians survive with burns. So the Vietnam War continues to rear its ugly head.
I suspect that this was attempted to be covered up, or was successfully covered up at the time. And nowadays, what would happen if this did occur, unless it'd be more likely to get out. I think there was a time when they covered it up in Afghanistan, and Chelsea Manning was one of those people who leaked that information.
Right.
That the kind of like tapes that showed that the American army mistakenly bombed the wrong village, and we're all cheering about it, the people who did it.
Yeah, the difference between 50 years ago and now here is that there's a lot more capacity for whistleblowers in this day and age.
Yes, although the government is more willing to severely punish whistleblowers because it's easier to whistleblow. But yeah, I would say that also people will be more likely to get outraged at this sort of thing than then. Although I would say 50 years ago is about the turning point where no longer people would think, oh, this is just, collateral damage. People would start to think, these are innocent people. How dare they be killed in a conflict that they don't want a part of?
And there you go. That was the news. It wasn't exactly the most packed of news weeks, but there we are. It means we can concentrate on the Moonbase, episode 4, which is tinted with nostalgia, but now that I look back at it, it's kind of a rushed conclusion.
Very average. It felt very of its time. classic kind of like B-movie sci-fi serial of the 60s. So that's the feel I got from it.
It's not often that I would say this doesn't feel like Doctor Who. And to say that about a Cyberman story is even weirder. But this doesn't feel like Doctor Who. This feels like average sci-fi story. Doctor Who was always so much smarter than this. Or if it wasn't smarter, it was at least stranger. Anyone could do this.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think the biggest thing that I would say that really the most obvious kind of stylistic choice that they made in this that really stands out is every now and then you get a dun 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 moment. Literally, the music almost goes like that, even to the point where the cliffhanger at the end of this episode ends with that kind of musical motif, and that is not particularly Doctor Who of the time or ever really, and that is very much what I'd associate with classic American style B-movie sci-fi stuff.
It's the same complete sudden change of tone that we spotted in the 10th Planet episode 3, where it became a war thriller thing. But that was kind of needed due to the sudden disappearance of Hartnell. Whereas this is more sticky-outy.
Yeah, I mean, there are some good points in this episode, but it's very much I felt very, very average, very mediocre sci-fi, as you said, Luke.
These Cybermen are coming across Ealing like there's no tomorrow, with their tiny feet. They establish radio contact with the Moonbase and tell them to give up. They're unable to contact Earth, the Moonbase, as the Cybermen destroy the radio masts by dismantling it. They deduce that help from Earth is on the way, but the Cybermen are quite aware and plan to deal with it.
Hobson in this scene differentiates himself so brilliantly from the commander in the 10th Planet. There's a bit where he says someone's got to go, and he's talking about going to meet the Cybermen, and he's willing to give up everything.
Even though he's the most important guy there, and that would be kind of stupid.
Well, he doesn't think of himself as that. He thinks of himself as one of the workers. This is someone of the older generation at the time that he's nice. And that's strange to think. Would we really have that now?
The kind of rapport Hobson has with his workers was very lately established in the script. I mean, it wasn't even in the script; it was during rehearsals. So it's more of a nuance from the actors to show unity amongst the base crew rather than Kit Peddle and Jerry Davis doing their thing with the writing. So
the staff are either British, mainland European, or Australian. There are no Russians. There are no Africans, no South Americans, Asians. They're all white men, which is not quite as international as the
10th Planet.
Yeah, although they're trying to be international because they have a Swedish guy, they've got an Australian guy, and they've got a French guy.
It's also in this scene that we see the start of what is the most important thing about this episode to me, is that it shoves the Doctor right as the main leading man.
Yes, he's got lines at last.
Yeah, and he takes centre stage twice with like a close-up, and he says brooding lines.
Perfect screensaver shots, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, well, the reason behind this seeming change in Troughton's tone is because the director, Barry, was able to tone down Troughton's performance because he thought it was a bit too silly, and Troughton had enough respect for Barry that he obeyed him on this occasion.
The Cybermen deal with the Earth ship in a roundabout way. They reactivate the controlled humans in the base with a new controlling device, who sneak into the gravitron room just as they got it stable, and then deflect the ship towards the sun with gravity. This is while Polly is making even more coffee, although with the feminism line we've just reached, that point is sort of null and void.
My favourite bit about this is you see the Cybermen with the aerials in them.
Yes.
I love this because it's got them taking technology that you just see lying around in 1967 and they're putting it in themselves.
Yes.
Radio and TV both had very obvious massive aerials. And back in 1967, computers were essentially spend hours at this thing and eventually it will tell you the sky is blue. Isn't that cool? So the fact that they're charting this as eventually it will get so small, we'll just put it inside ourselves.
Indeed, it will become even more and more organic, and you end up with the end evolution process of the Teletubbies.
What's interesting is that in the previous serial, there was a definite opening of the mouth, whereas here it has gone into a slit, which just comes down, and the speech has become even more robotic. The eyes are totally circular, and they look like they're built in, rather than with the cloth faces simply covering something in the previous story. Their skin has become metal.
It's just a natural progression of the idea of where we saw them before, isn't it?
Mm.
People, at least people in the production, thought they preferred it to the original design.
Because they're so far removed from humanity, I suppose. Because there is a distance between the humans and this robotic Cybermen, rather than the humans and the 10th planet Cybermen, which is a bit too close to reality in some cases, what with cybernetic enhancements and all that.
And admittedly, it can look a bit... The 10th planet designs, if you really want to... If you weren't engaged in the story, you would look at it and kind of go, they do look a bit unconvincing. If you weren't into it, you know what I mean? So I could see why people would prefer this design, because they do look fairly good for something from the 60s, I think.
It's the point that they have so many redesigns that people can be polarised as to which ones are their favourites. And so it eventually gets to the end goal of, why don't we just include every single one of them? To stop a reinvasion of controlled humans, Ben and Jamie barricade the medical bays. Evans, with a different name on his name badge because he's knocked out many people, deflects the gravitron, putting the Earth at risk again. The Cybermen repeat their threat, give up, and then decide to show a strength of force. They puncture the dome of the Moonbase. Everybody flails about, and Hobson's coat eventually stops the hole that was made by the puncture for approximately 2 seconds, and then a coffee tray does the job for extremely longer. Oh, science.
Yeah, I would say this gets half a point for science, because the reason is, so normally explosive decompression is that explosive. Here, yes, you see them kind of like flailing around and whatever, but they don't get completely sucked through the hole. I know it's a small hole, but they're not being pulled completely towards it, because in reality, if you had a hole that big in a room that big, you wouldn't be sucked through it or sucked towards it. So I feel like that's Kit Pedler giving a bit of a kind of idea of what decompression's like. But yeah, the coat, that's kind of taking the mickey, isn't it, really, that was able to block it at all.
Extremely competent scientists, please remember. Although I suppose they're kind of stressed, what with having to deal all with this within 12 hours.
This is when I noticed something very worrying about this story, that New Who keeps doing. And directorially, there's one shot where everyone is crammed into one shot, and then it flicks to the Doctor, and he's on his own in the centre of the shot. And this whole thing is placing the Doctor as this godlike figure that
yes.
he really shouldn't be. And once we get to Tom Baker, that thing is totally out the window. But this serial, we've got the big speech about evil must be fought. We've got him talking to himself. We got all of the hero shots here. It's trying to persuade the audience, here is your hero. And it's trying to reinstate the faith that he might have lost by being a bit wacky and a bit stupid in the Underwater Menace and in the Highlanders.
So it's the gradual process of evolution from one extreme of the character to the other extreme.
Mm.
Yeah, well, this is where Troughton's finally settling down into his. He's still a bit of a clown, but that's a facade. Underneath, he is this more intelligent, actually.
Thanks to the Cybermen's show of force, Evans and, let's face it, the entirety of the base who were mind controlled by the Cybermen have fallen unconscious, so the Gravitron scientists regain control of the base again. The Cybermen made the hole with a laser weapon and prepare to fire it again, and bring in reinforcements with their box of doom. In the time it takes them to fire, the Doctor realises that the Gravitron has a force field that can deflect the beam, although why it didn't do this in the first place remains to be seen, and we see the Cybermen fail. Although I have just realised, because they regained control of the base, they reactivated the force field, hence why the beam failed. Yeah, it's kind of hand-waved.
What gets me about this is that this is the complete turning point of the episode. Until this point, it's basically been Hobson's story. He's been the one running around trying to get everything sorted. But here, directorially again, Hobson looks through the telescope to see the cyber ships, but the Doctor doesn't need one. He just sees it. Hobson and Benoit dive onto the ground, but the Doctor stands tall. And finally, the Doctor takes command and he tells them what the plan is. He's gone from lurking in the background, he's got all of his cards ready, and now he's showing them. And now we know and we can trust him.
The Doctor decides to use the Gravitron to deflect the Cybermen off the moon, and this is done with a bit of rejigging and manual labour and removing the safety cutouts. The Cybermen all float away, as do their spaceships. The world is safe, just like that, apart from damaging the Gravitron and losing control of the Earth's weather, but who cares about that?
So where all the scenes shot on Ealing look pretty damn good, actually, including.
It doesn't give you the full time to see how the effects work like it does in the Underwater Menace.
Yes, and I have to say that the set itself does look good. It looks like the moon, and yeah, the wires, you can't see the wires when they're lifted up, the Cybermen, and it looks pretty good.
Yes, that deals with the Cybermen, and yippee, the Earth's safe. The Doctor and crew slip away, back to the TARDIS, watching the Cybermen spaceships float away. I hope it's the last we see of them, which is an interesting quote, because they know full well they're going to come back. Off the TARDIS goes, and we're treated to a glimpse of the next episode with the time scanner, which gives us a view of the future, which, as Jamie predicts, is a pretty terrible thing, because we're going to see a claw hand. Dum dum dum. The end.
Yeah, and that shoehorned in cliffhanger that does actually end on a dun 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 kind of sound effect, which is quite hilarious.
And seeming Jerry Davis wrote the TARDIS scenes for the last episode, The Underwater Menace, I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't write this one too.
Yeah.
Very quickly wrapped up, rushed conclusion even.
Well,
which is a shame, but.
Well, yeah, I know. Considering the amount of time that they spend in episodes 1 and 2 setting up the story, you know that they could have spent more time in the resolution.
Yeah. Nostalgia means it doesn't really detract from the episode's enjoyment.
Well, hold on. No, Nick, because you have to have your climax in episode 4. You can't have the climax go across 2 episodes. Like in How the Keys of Marinus, you have half of the hearing scene in episode 6. That just wouldn't work tonally.
Right. Well, no. Okay. I'm not saying you need to have, obviously, keep the climax in episode 4, but they could. It's just that if they can only resolve everything within 5 minutes, it means that they need to start. They need to put more things in episode 3 then, I guess, so that it starts, so you're able to resolve it all by the end rather than have it all resolved in like 5 minutes.
So, what are your scores for Personal and 50 Years Ago?
I would give it a 6. It's not as great as I remember it being. The nostalgia factor has tinted me somewhat. Like you say, episodes 1 and 2 are a great build-up, but it kind of all gets let down. Troughton, when he's finally given something to do in episode 4, saves episode 4, in my opinion. But yeah, it's above average for me. And as for people in 1967, I believe they'd give themselves a 7.
I am going to agree with you. This is also slightly above average. I also going to give it a 6. It feels like a not as risk-taking version of the 10th Planet. Someone at the time, though, I'm going to take into account that this was on the moon, which is basically the reason why this thing was made at all.
Yeah.
Kit Pedler was told, make a thing on the moon. So I'm going to say 8.5 out of 10. And it's a bit more dynamic than your regular TV back then. And it's also a lot more accessible. And the Doctor's finally how you'd think he should be if you were a Hartnell fan.
Yeah, I'm going to say 6 as well, just to be boring. Do you agree with you? I'd say 50 years ago they'd give it 8. Yeah, as you said, Luke, it's on the moon. The moon looks good. The Cybermen look cool. I imagine the kids would think the Cybermen look cool. They probably like that lightning effect. I could imagine them going around in the playground, kind of making that hand gestures to other kids or whatever, like, you know, speaking in that tone. I think the change of voice was very good for the kids as well. That would be easier to mimic.
And now we shall get to a post-mortem of the Moonbase. Said story was commissioned because of the positive reaction of the Cybermen in the 10th Planet, wouldn't you know? With Jamie still being developed, it was down to Jerry Davis, who liked claustrophobic, aka base under siege stories, to embellish the character in editing. The great costumes of the 10th Planet were deemed cumbersome, and so the Cybermen became robotic.
Not only were they deemed cumbersome, but people would actually collapse in the suits. So
That too.
BBC, ever mindful of health and safety in the 60s, decided that it was probably just too expensive to keep paying off actors to keep quiet. When I was reading the novelisation, I wondered if Jerry Davis is a bit ashamed of the 10th Planet, because it starts with the creation of the Cybermen, and he basically says they're from Telos, and he makes it sound like the Moonbase was their first contact with Earth, and they seem much more like mustache-twirling villains.
So, in post-production, episode 3 lost a reference to both Mondas and Telos. So, Kit Pedler and Jerry Davis had the Cybermen continuity ready for Tomb of the Cybermen later in the year. They already had the concept of Telos down, because they were ready for yet another Cyberman story.
So it's interesting that they're so confident of the Cybermen. In fact, Jerry Davis is the one who commissions the stories, knows that he's going to commission himself. But they're desperate to get down that world building, so that in episode 2 we see the Cybermen mythologized within the context of the story, and outside they're trying to let us in on they're really big in this universe. They are worth looking at.
Yes. We were the first space travellers from Mondas. We left before it was destroyed. We have come from the planet Telos.
Right, okay. Well, that makes sense. So yeah, in the cyber continuity, they colonized Telos.
Colonisation. Ding! We can connect it to the news. Perfect.
Ah, perfect.
As we mentioned, the director Maurice Barry attempted to persuade Patrick Troughton to play the Doctor as less of a clown, although to retain certain elements of humour. To this end, Troughton's baggy trousers were taken in a little each week, which Troughton apparently didn't notice. The tall hat was abandoned at the request of a BBC drama executive. Well done him. Maximum publicity was given for the Moonbase, with Radio Times coverage, trailers, and interviews on BBC Two. The Morning Star's Anne Lawrence wished she could have had less screaming from Polly, wouldn't we all? The Cybermen remained favourites, hence the commissioning of Tomb of the Cybermen. Troughton was praised, but the scripts were not. The show is surviving.
Yeah.
And more importantly, it's gaining audience levels. They're increasing against Doddy's Magic Box, Ken Dodd, again, Batman, and Just Jimmy on the various ITV regions.
It's good that against Doddy's Magic Box and Batman, which are both quite mad, this story and series, which are putting in extra amounts of political ideas and scientific ideas.
But it's also easily accessible for children.
Mm.
And then finally, the Moonbase was sold to Australia, New Zealand, Uganda, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Zambia. The original videotapes were wiped in 1969, and only the film prints of episodes 2 and 4 remained by 1977. And that was The Moonbase. It's a middling sequel to The 10th Planet.
It's no 10th Planet.
It's no 10th Planet, though, which is a shame.
But it's not the greatest Cyberman story in the world, but neither does it embarrass them, I would say.
And...
Oh, that's very important.
Yes.
God.
Great care needs to be taken with Cybermen in the future. Again, hint, hint.
and also, it was crucial that in their second appearance that they not appear silly. Other than the very ending, where you could say that maybe it's a bit silly, up till then, they are not depicted as being silly at all. And thankfully, they have a great sequel to this as well. So, frankly, I don't know why they ditched the second design, because I think that's better than the Wheel Space and the Invasion designs.
I will say that I do like that one more, again, because of nostalgia for this, the Moonbase.
Frankly, I think the original design is really good, the 80s one is decent, actually. I think I like the fact you can see their chin in the 80s one.
That's only Earthshot you can see the chin. They got rid of that by 5 Doctors.
Did they? Well, I'm still counting that as that. Okay, whatever. Earthshot design, that's quite good. It's 10th Planet, Moonbase / Tomb of the Cybermen, and Earthshot designs are the 3 best ones. Yeah. I don't think the New Who ones are that great. They're all too over-designed in New Who.
Mm-hmm.
It is always very interesting to compare Cybermen and the evolution of the Cybermen and the evolution of Doctor Who between 50 years ago and now. Thank you very much for watching. You can find us on Blogspot, which redirects to iTunes. Leave positive comments there, it helps. You can also find us on Facebook and YouTube, where you can like, comment and subscribe, and also Google Plus, if you dare. We shall be back next week with the opening of the Macra Terror, although there is no Terror, and certainly no Macra. I have been Ben.
I've been Luke.
And I've been Nick.
Thank you, and goodbye.